When she hit the rope in 22 seconds, recovered from a sabotaged wall hold, and stayed calm under pressure, every real soldier should have seen it. This was not some admin clerk pretending to be tough. This was someone trained in places most people will never even hear about.
Have you ever met a bully so cocky they practically radiate smugness? That was Staff Sergeant Ryan Hollis. He stood planted in the middle of the obstacle course, a smirk practically stapled to his face as his voice boomed over the 35 soldiers suffering in the Georgia heat. "The new girl thinks she's some kind of hotshot," he announced to anyone who'd listen. "I give her 10 minutes before she's crying for her mama." It was the kind of morning where the sun felt like it had a personal vendetta against you. If you've ever seen someone get singled out just for being quiet, you know exactly what was coming. And if you believe that karma always settles the score, even if it takes its time, go ahead and hit that like button, because you're going to love how this ends. 20 feet away, Corporal Kate Brennan didn't so much as blink. She was a fresh face, only a month in, a quiet transfer who did her work and kept to herself. To most people, she was just part of the scenery. But to a loudmouth like Hollis, her silence was an open invitation. "Hey, Brennan, you deaf?" he barked, stomping toward her. "Need a head start? I mean, this course was designed for actual soldiers." A couple of his cronies snickered. His top follower, Corporal Draven, even elbowed the guy next to him. But Kate? She just stood there, her expression as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. Without saying a thing, she started rolling up her sleeves. First the right, then the left, each movement deliberate and smooth. As the camo fabric bunched up at her elbows, everyone saw it. Her forearms were laced with old, faded scars. But that wasn't what made everyone stop. It was the ink. Her left arm was dominated by a massive tattoo of a bald eagle, its wings spread in full flight. In its talons, it was crushing what looked like an alphanumeric code. This wasn't some five and dime tattoo. This was a masterpiece, the kind that costs a small fortune and tells a big story. Hollis's condescending grin just stretched wider. "Well, now, what's all this?" he sneered, jabbing a finger toward her arm for everyone's benefit. "Look here, everybody. The new girl got herself some wannabe tough ink. How precious. Where'd you get that? The prize booth at the county fair?" The laughter grew louder this time. Draven was so amused, he pulled out his phone to take a picture. For the first time, a small muscle jumped in Kate's jaw. She ignored them, turning her attention to the massive rope hanging in front of her. But the way her hands found their grip, it was different. It wasn't the awkward hold of a newbie. Her hands closed around it with a practiced ease that just screamed muscle memory. Clear across the training yard, Master Sergeant Dale Jackson, a 52-year-old vet who had seen everything twice, stopped what he was doing. He'd been watching the whole scene unfold, but something about the way Kate gripped that rope, combined with that very specific eagle tattoo, made his eyes narrow. That design, that coded string of characters, it stirred a faint memory of a classified briefing and a file so secret it officially didn't exist. He began to walk toward the group, a look of dawning realization on his face. Kate took a slow, deep breath. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. It was a tactical breathing technique, designed for intense focus, but Hollis was too busy flapping his gums to notice. "Seriously, Brennan, that tattoo is atrocious. It looks like a pigeon had a seizure on your arm." At last, Kate let go of the rope and turned to face him squarely. She just stared, her silence carrying more weight than any insult he could throw. Thinking he'd broken her, Hollis scoffed. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Then, in a single fluid motion, she spun back to the rope and began to climb. Now, a passing grade on the rope climb is 30 seconds. If you're a beast, you might do it in 25. Kate rang the bell at the top in 22 seconds flat. She moved like a piston, no wasted motion, just pure, efficient strength. On the way down, she didn't just slide. She walked her hands down with flawless technique, landing on her feet as silently as a cat. The entire yard went completely still. Then, Hollis started a slow, mocking clap. "Well, how about that? Beginner's luck, everyone. Let's see if she can do it again." A few soldiers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. But Master Sergeant Jackson knew exactly what he'd just witnessed. That wasn't basic Army training. That grip, that breathing technique, that was straight out of SARE school. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. That was Special Operations training. People who pass that course don't just wind up as quiet administrative transfers. While Hollis tried to regain control of the situation, Kate calmly walked to the water station, took a long drink, and pulled out a small, worn notebook, jotting down a few lines as if nothing had happened. Hollis was visibly flustered. His sidekick, Draven, decided to help. "What are you writing in your secret diary, Brennan?" "Dear diary, the big mean sergeant hurt my feelings today." Kate just clicked her pen shut, tucked the notebook away, and leveled him with that same flat, unreadable gaze. Draven actually took an involuntary step back. Hollis jumped back in, his voice a little too loud, a little too shaky. "All right, people, let's go. Wall climb is next. Brennan, try not to chip a nail." As the platoon moved toward the 12-foot wall, Master Sergeant Jackson quietly fell into step beside Kate. "That ink," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "The code on your arm. Where did you get it?" For the very first time, an emotion flickered across Kate's face, a flash of recognition. "Can't discuss that, Master Sergeant," she replied, her voice low. Jackson gave a single, knowing nod. He was smart enough not to press, but the gears were turning in his head. Task Force 17, Operation Sandstorm. The ghost unit that was never officially formed. The mission that rescued 40 hostages. And that eagle insignia? If that tattoo was authentic, then Corporal Brennan wasn't just a soldier. She was a legend. Hollis, desperate to reassert his authority, went first, scrambling over the wall with a lot of theatrical grunting. When it was Kate's turn, he made a big production of checking his watch. "We'll give you the full 2 minutes, Brennan." "Take your time." She began her ascent, and from behind, Jackson watched her every single move. But something was terribly wrong. Jackson had seen Hollis messing around with the wall earlier. As Kate's hand reached for the final hold at the very top, the entire piece tore loose from the wood. With a screech of metal on wood, she was suddenly dangling 12 feet above the hard-packed earth by one hand, swinging wildly. A collective gasp went through the platoon. But Kate didn't scream, and she didn't fall. In a move that seemed to defy gravity, her core muscles locked, and her free hand shot up, slapping the top edge of the wall. Her fingertips dug into the splintered wood with a grip that seemed humanly impossible. With one brutal explosion of power, she pulled herself over the top and landed on the other side with barely a sound. The yard was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Jackson knew then and there that wasn't training. That was survival instinct. Honed in the most dangerous corners of the world. Hollis was the first to break the silence, his voice high with panic. "See, someone must have loosened that to make her look good." Kate walked back around the wall, her breathing still slow and controlled. She didn't say a thing. She knew he did it, and he knew that she knew. But Draven, being the idiot he was, shoved his phone right in her face. "Smile for the camera, fake hero. This is going straight to the group chat." And he snapped 3 quick pictures, sealing his own doom. Her tattoo, her face, the broken handhold. Then he spun around, his thumbs flying across his screen. Less than 30 seconds later, the pictures were live in the unit's private chat. 18 people hit the laughing emoji. The comments rolled in. "Total wannabe. Tactical Barbie. That ink is so fake. Did your boyfriend draw it on with a Sharpie?" Brennan glanced down at her forearm. The eagle stared back, its talons gripping a code that only a handful of people on Earth could authenticate. She pulled her sleeves back down, covering it from view. Not out of shame, but out of strategy. Hollis was loud, Draven was careless, and loud, careless people make massive mistakes when they think they're on top. Have you ever been totally underestimated just because of how you look? The training day continued. A tactical gear inspection was next, followed by a timed ammo can carry. Lieutenant Marcus Carver, the officer in charge of the range, arrived around 9:45 to oversee the rest of the exercises. He was 30, with sharp, intense eyes, and was so by the book that he was either your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on what side of the regulations you stood on. He carried a clipboard and had a zero-tolerance policy for safety breaches. During the ammo carry, Hollis saw his opening. While Brennan was in the middle of her set, he pulled Lieutenant Carver aside near the equipment shed. Jackson, who was about 20 feet away organizing climbing gear, had to strain to hear their conversation over the general noise. He only caught fragments. "Serious safety violation, sir," Hollis was saying. "Removed her gloves during the wall climb." "Reckless endangerment." Carver's brow furrowed. He looked over at Brennan, who was just setting down a 40-pound ammo can with textbook form, straight back, bent knees. Hollis slipped a folded piece of paper into the lieutenant's hand, a formal complaint he'd already written up with today's date and Brennan's name printed at the top. Carver scanned it, his expression unreadable. "You're officially filing this, Sergeant Hollis?" Hollis puffed out his chest. "Yes, sir. Rules are rules." Carver nodded slowly. "Understood. I'll look into this." As Hollis walked off, he shot a triumphant smirk in Brennan's direction that made Jackson's own hands curl into fists. Faking a safety violation was a dirty move, the kind that could ruin a career. It meant mandatory investigations, suspension, and if the brass wanted you gone, it was an easy ticket out. And Sergeant Hollis had just aimed that loaded gun at a soldier who wasn't even putting up a fight. As soon as Hollis swaggered off, Master Sergeant Jackson stepped right up to Lieutenant Carver. "Sir, permission to speak my mind?" Carver glanced up from his clipboard. "Granted, Master Sergeant. I was the one supervising the wall climb. Corporal Brennan was wearing her gloves for the entire duration. I'll put my rank on that." Carver gave him a long, assessing look. "I hear you, but Sergeant Hollis filed a formal complaint, which means I have to open an inquiry." "I understand, sir. I just needed to ensure my own observation was part of the official record." Carver's gaze drifted over to Brennan. She was now coaching a younger private on how to properly grip an ammo crate, her voice low and steady. It was the picture of patience and good leadership, a total mismatch for someone accused of recklessly cutting corners. "Your input is noted, Master Sergeant." Jackson turned away, his jaw clenched. He'd done his part, followed the proper channels. The ball was now in Carver's court, and he had to decide whether to follow the truth or the politics. The drills continued to bake under the sun. At 1100 hours, Carver finally called a 10-minute water break. The troops scattered for shade, chugging from canteens. Brennan found a lone spot on a bench near the equipment racks and began to peel an orange with meticulous care. Jackson watched her from across the training yard. She wasn't restless, wasn't scrolling on her phone, wasn't trying to find a friendly face. She just sat in her own bubble of silence, eating the orange one perfect slice at a time, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Meanwhile, near the latrines, Draven and his buddies were huddled in a tight circle, snickering as they stared at a phone screen. Jackson knew exactly what they were doing, piling on in the group chat, spinning their own narrative about the quiet corporal, Brennan the tryhard, Brennan the fraud, Brennan the easy target. What they didn't notice was her left hand, which rested on her thigh, fingers tapping out a silent, repetitive pattern. 4 quick taps, a pause. 4 quick taps, a pause. It looked like some kind of personal code, a method for staying grounded. Or maybe both. At 11:15, Carver's voice boomed across the yard. "Brennan, get over here on the double!" A hush fell over the entire area. Every single soldier froze. Brennan rose to her feet, dusted the citrus zest from her hands, and began to walk. Her pace was deliberate, unhurried. She stopped before the lieutenant and snapped to parade rest, hands locked behind her back, eyes looking straight through him. Carver held up the flimsy complaint form from Hollis. "Corporal Brennan, I've received a formal safety complaint regarding your performance on the wall climb this morning. The allegation is that you removed your protective gloves, a direct violation of training protocols. What do you have to say for yourself?" You could have heard a cricket chirp. 35 sets of eyes were locked on Brennan. Hollis watched from the sidelines, arms folded over his chest, a smug grin plastered on his face. Draven had his phone up, shamelessly recording. When Brennan spoke, her voice was low but clear as a bell. "I kept my gloves on for the entire climb, sir. Master Sergeant Jackson can attest to that." Carver shot a look at Jackson, who confirmed with a short, emphatic nod. Hollis immediately pushed forward, raising his voice. "Sir, With all due respect, my vantage point was much closer. I clearly saw her ditch the gloves about halfway up, Carver's head swiveled between them. Hollis, blustering and self-assured. Brennan, calm and composed. Jackson, unwavering and certain. 3 people, 3 different stories. The only video evidence came from Draven's phone, and what a shock, it was too grainy to show her hands clearly. Corporal Brennan, until this is resolved, you are hereby suspended from all training exercises for the remainder of the day. You will report to the company office at 1300 hours to provide a formal statement. Brennan's face remained a perfect mask. Yes, sir. Dismissed. She pivoted and headed for the gear shed to collect her belongings, leaving a storm of whispers in her wake. Hollis flashed a triumphant smirk at Draven. Jackson's face was pure stone as he watched Brennan pack her rucksack, her notebook, and her water bottle. She moved with an unnerving calm, methodical and precise, as if being publicly shamed and framed was just another part of her daily routine. But Jackson noticed her breathing had changed. It was a controlled 4x4 box breath. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. As she passed Hollis on her way out, he leaned in and hissed, low enough for only a few to hear, I told you that you don't belong here. Should have stayed in whatever backwater town you crawled out of. She paused, turned her head just enough to meet his gaze, and for the first time that day, a tiny smile touched her lips. It was a razor-thin, ice-cold smile with zero warmth behind it. Then she turned and kept walking, leaving Hollis standing there with a confused frown, like a man who just won the lottery but somehow felt poorer for it. Draven just laughed and slapped him on the back. It's over, dude. Carver's going to string her up. Hollis nodded, but he couldn't take his eyes off Brennan's retreating figure. Jackson waited until the yard cleared out for chow, then pulled out his own phone. He scrolled through a list of contacts he hadn't touched in years until he found the one he was looking for. He hit dial. After 4 rings, a voice like gravel in a blender answered. Jackson, don't waste my time. I'm not. I need you to run a name for me, completely off the record. Shoot, Corporal Kate Brennan. Stationed at Fort Benning. She got here about 4 weeks ago. What's the angle? She's got a tattoo. An eagle for Task Force 17 and an Operation Sandstorm code. The other end of the line went completely silent. Then the voice came back, sharp and serious. Are you 100% positive? I'm looking right at the file photo. That unit doesn't officially exist, Dale. Tell me something I don't know. Another long pause. Give me 2 hours. Don't call me, I'll call you. The line went dead. Jackson slid the phone back into his pocket and stared across the empty training grounds. The Georgia sun was climbing, making heat waves dance on the red clay. In the distance, another unit was being put through its paces, their sergeant's shouts echoing faintly. Everything seemed normal, but Jackson had a gut feeling that normal was about to get tossed out the window. At 1300 hours, Brennan sat in a sterile, gray office, facing Lieutenant Carver. He was scrolling through her official service record on his desktop, and the file was thin, so thin it was suspicious. It showed basic training, a specialty school for administrative work, a cushy logistics post in Germany, and then a transfer here. It was utterly unremarkable. There was nothing in it that could possibly explain the tattoo, her flawless climbing technique, or the way she'd recovered from a near fall on the wall with the instinct of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before, probably with bullets flying past her head. Carver leaned back, tapping his fingers together. Corporal, your file says your specialty is pushing paper and moving supplies. It also says you have never been deployed to a combat theater. That is correct, sir. So then, tell me about the tattoo. Brennan's hands were folded calmly in her lap. It's a personal matter, sir. Personal how? Is it in memory of someone? It's for someone I once knew. Carver's gaze sharpened. Someone you knew who had the security clearance for a Task Force 17 emblem? Brennan met his stare head-on, her own expression unreadable. I am not at liberty to discuss that, sir. Are you not at liberty, or are you just refusing to? Both, sir. The air in the room grew heavy. Carver picked up a pen and started tapping it on his desk, his mind racing. On one side, he had Hollis's formal, career-ending accusation. On the other, he had Jackson's steadfast, conflicting account. And right in front of him sat a corporal who moved like an elite operator, had the composure of a seasoned spy, and wore a tattoo that was supposed to be a ghost story whispered about in classified circles. None of it made any sense. Corporal Brennan, let me be perfectly clear with you. If you are falsifying your service record, that's grounds for an immediate discharge. If that tattoo is an act of stolen valor, that's a federal crime. But if you're telling the truth, and there's a classified annex to your file that's been wiped clean, you have to give me something to go on. Anything. Corporal, I need a name, a point of contact, something more than just a hunch from my master sergeant. Because as it stands, I have one NCO's word against yours, and his version says you're either a liar or incompetent, and I have zero evidence to prove otherwise. Brennan sat in complete silence for what felt like an eternity. 10 seconds, then 20. Carver didn't rush her. Finally, she reached into her pocket and produced a tiny, folded slip of paper. She pushed it across the desk. Written on it in crisp, block letters was a phone number and a single word. Sandstorm. Call that number, sir. Give them that word. They'll provide you with the information you require. Carver picked it up. And what if they don't? He challenged. Then I'm everything Sergeant Hollis accused me of being. Carver looked deep into her eyes, searching for any flicker of deceit. He saw nothing but steel. He carefully folded the piece of paper and tucked it into his breast pocket. You're dismissed for now, but don't go far. I have a feeling we'll be speaking again very soon. Brennan stood, gave a textbook perfect salute, turned on her heel, and walked out. Carver was left alone in the silence, his eyes fixed on the door. He pulled out the slip of paper again, wondering what kind of hornet's nest he was about to kick. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed down on the base. Brennan crossed the main quad, moving like a shadow through the throngs of soldiers heading for the mess hall. She passed the motor pool, a chaotic symphony of rumbling engines and shouted orders. She was in plain sight, yet it felt like she was completely invisible. As she neared the administrative building, she saw Draven and his friends still loitering, faces illuminated by their phone screens, utterly oblivious. As Brennan rounded the corner, Draven's taunt cut through the air. Hey Brennan, heard you got kicked off the training squad. Tough break. Maybe next time, don't pretend you've got skills you don't have. His friends chuckled along with him, but Brennan didn't even glance their way. She just kept walking, her stride unbroken, her mind focused on a simple rhythm. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4. Draven's smirk faltered. Did she just blow me off? He grumbled, watching her go. They all quickly forgot about her, turning back to their screens. What they couldn't see was Brennan's hand briefly touching her forearm right over the ink hidden beneath her sleeve. They had no clue that every single insult, every photo they snapped, was being meticulously recorded not by her, but by someone else. Do you think one person can truly stand up against a corrupt system? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Someone watching from a great distance, with deep resources, endless patience, and a memory that never forgot. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Jackson's phone vibrated. He excused himself from the vehicle bay inspection and took the call. Jackson here. It was that same gravelly voice as before, but the tone was different now, hushed and serious. Listen, Dale, I did some digging on Kate Brennan, born in 1996, enlisted in 2015. Officially, she's an administrative clerk with a perfect record. And unofficially? Jackson asked. There was a moment of silence. Unofficially, there's a hole. From 2019 to 2021, 24 months where she was supposedly assigned to a base in Germany, but every travel manifest, every access log, it's all either scrubbed clean or blacked out. And that ink you mentioned, the voice continued, I described it to an old contact of mine. The guy went pale. He told me, if that tattoo is legitimate, she's no paper pusher. She's tied to Tier 1 operations, could be intelligence, could be support. Hell, she could have been on the front lines. Whatever she was involved in, it's buried so deep it would take a decade to find. Jackson felt a knot tighten in his gut. Operation Sandstorm, he said, barely a whisper. The voice on the other end dropped even lower. I can't tell you if that operation ever happened, Dale. Not on any record, anywhere. But I can tell you this. Anyone with that mark on their skin has either saved a hell of a lot of good people or they know where a lot of bad people are buried. Maybe both. So what in the world is she doing here, posing as a clerk in a basic training company? I have no idea, the voice admitted, but you need to be asking yourself a different question. What kind of person would willingly accept a demotion, hide their true capabilities, and let a loudmouth like Hollis walk all over them? She's either running from something powerful or she's hunting something specific, and my bet is on hunting. The call ended with a click. Jackson just stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his thoughts racing. Hunting. It suddenly clicked into place. Hollis wasn't just bullying her, he was panicking. He'd gone from making crude jokes to filing fabricated reports in under 3 hours. That wasn't just a jerk being a jerk. That was a cornered animal trying to eliminate a threat before it could expose him. It meant Hollis was hiding something huge. Jackson jammed his phone into his pocket and broke into a near run toward the company headquarters. He had to reach Carver before the lieutenant made a career-ending mistake. He had to tell him who he was really dealing with. But when he burst into the office, it was deserted. A sticky note on the desk simply said Carver was at the command center for a secure line call. Jackson cursed under his breath and spun around to leave. At that moment, he caught sight of Brennan through the window, walking across the compound toward her barracks. And about 20 yards back, trailing her, were Hollis and Draven, phones held up, whispering to each other. Every single one of Jackson's combat instincts flared to life. He stepped back outside, making sure to keep all 3 of them in his line of sight. They weren't closing the distance, just shadowing her, probably recording her, trying to cook up more fake evidence to support their bogus complaints. This had moved beyond simple bullying. It was now a calculated, tactical move. It was like watching a pair of hyenas stalking their prey. Brennan reached the door to her barracks and paused. She turned slowly, her gaze landing directly on Hollis from 30 yards away. She didn't shout or gesture. She just watched him. And in that one single look, Jackson recognized something he hadn't seen in a very long time. Something from his own days in the field. Patience. The kind of unnerving patience you have when you know, without a doubt, that your opponent is about to make a foolish, fatal error, and all you need to do is wait for it to happen. As dusk fell, the base settled into its evening routine. The clang of trays from the dining hall, the groaning metal of cooling engines, and the distant shouts of instructors drilling a few unlucky souls. Brennan sat alone in the barracks common area, a well-read book open in her lap, though her eyes hadn't moved from the page in over 10 minutes. Around her, soldiers were engrossed in a football game, a loud card game, and the usual barracks banter. She was completely invisible. At 7 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Training yard, 2100, come alone. She read the message once, deleted it, carefully placed a bookmark in her book, and got up. No one even noticed she was gone. The training yard was a whole different beast after sundown. Every piece of equipment threw long, menacing shadows, and the massive floodlights felt less like they were lighting the place up and more like they were just pushing back in overwhelming darkness. Brennan strolled in at 8:05, her hands casually tucked in her pockets as if she were just out for a late-night walk. For a moment, the yard seemed completely empty. Then, like a ghost, Hollis stepped out from behind a concrete barrier, with his shadow, Draven, right at his heel. 2 more of their buddies emerged from the darkness by the climbing ropes, their faces little more than smudges in the gloom. Nice of you to join us, Brennan. Hollis's voice had that usual smugness, but tonight it was laced with something else, something that sounded a lot like fear. Brennan just stopped about 15 feet away, her silence a solid wall. You're causing problems, Hollis said, slowly walking toward her. Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, making people nervous. We can't have that. Still, Brennan didn't say a word. She just watched him, calm and steady. That's when Draven pulled out his phone and shoved the glowing screen toward her. She recognized the pictures from their private group chat, but then he started swiping. He scrolled through a gallery of screenshots, inventory reports, serial numbers for expensive equipment, and shipping records. And on a couple of those records, clear as day, were two names: Hollis and Draven. "You're a smart girl, Brennan," Hollis said, his voice dropping to a low threat. "I'm sure you've connected the dots. So here's the plan. Tomorrow morning, you're putting in for a transfer. You're going to tell Carver that this just isn't for you, and then you're going to get lost." Brennan's eyes flicked from the damning evidence on the phone to Hollis's face. She still refused to speak. Or Hollis's voice dropped to a menacing growl. "We bury Carver's desk in so many incident reports and signed complaints that you don't just get a transfer. You get a dishonorable discharge that will follow you for the rest of your life." The two men by the ropes began to circle around, cutting off any path of retreat. It was 4 against 1. In the dead of night, with no one around to witness what happened next, Brennan took a single, deliberate breath. In for 4, hold for 4. Out for 4, hold for 4. Then, in a voice that was quiet but carried with absolute clarity, she finally spoke. "No." Hollis looked genuinely stunned. "What?" "No," she said again, her voice like steel. "I'm not transferring. I'm not going anywhere. And you're going to need a lot more than doctored reports and a few childish photos." Draven gave a shaky laugh. "You really think you're some kind of action hero?" he sneered. "You think that ridiculous tattoo is going to make us back down?" Brennan's eyes locked onto him, cold and unblinking. "It's not for show," Draven scoffed. "Yeah? Prove it." A faint, chilling smile touched Brennan's lips. "I am." Hollis's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, getting so close she could smell the sour coffee on his breath. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Yes," Brennan replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." The challenge hung between them, thick and heavy. In the distance, a transport truck sounded its horn. The world outside this circle of light continued on, but right here, time had frozen. Hollis's hand twitched, as if he was about to draw a weapon, but he stopped himself. He knew that escalating to physical violence was a line he couldn't come back from. "Not yet. You're making a monumental mistake, Brennan," he warned, his voice tight. Brennan's reply was simple: "We'll see." Defeated, Hollis finally backed away, signaling his crew to follow. They retreated into the darkness like a pack of chastised dogs, leaving Brennan standing alone in the harsh glare of the floodlights. As they disappeared, Draven cast one last look over his shoulder, his face a mixture of confusion and a flicker of genuine fear. The moment they were gone, Brennan released a long, slow exhale. Her hands, which had been hanging relaxed at her sides, unclenched. She had been prepared. Prepared for them to attack, prepared to defend herself with precise and overwhelming force, prepared to end this entire charade right then and there. But they hadn't, and that made them more useful. They were still collecting the evidence for her, one stupid, arrogant mistake at a time. She took a winding route back to her barracks, a path she knew was a dead zone for the base's security cameras. Perched on the edge of her bunk, she pulled out a plain green notebook and a pen. She wrote down 3 things: names, times, and direct quotes from the confrontation. She then took a clear photo of the page and sent it to a contact saved in her phone only as a single dot. Less than 30 seconds later, a response came. Acknowledged. Proceed. She deleted the message, the reply, and the photo, then slipped the notebook back into her gear. Tomorrow was another day, another round in this quiet war, and another chance for Hollis to dig his own grave a little deeper. And he would. They always did. People who believe they're untouchable get careless, and careless people always leave a trail. Brennan closed her eyes, her breathing falling back into its familiar, steady rhythm as she drifted off to sleep. Breathe in for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds, hold for 4. On the far side of the base, Lieutenant Carver sat in the driver's seat of his car, staring at the number Corporal Brennan had given him. He'd just walked out of a 2-hour classified briefing that left him with more questions than answers. Now, he was about to risk his entire career on a single phone call to save one of his soldiers. He hit dial. After 3 rings, a cool, professional voice picked up. "This is Lieutenant Marcus Carver, Fort Benning," he said. I got this number from Corporal Kate Brennan. The password is Sandstorm. The silence on the other end was heavy. 5 seconds felt like a minute. 10 seconds felt like an hour. Finally, a clipped voice said, "Stand by." The line didn't disconnect, but all sound vanished. Carver waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, as 90 agonizing seconds ticked by. A new voice suddenly broke the silence, deeper and carrying an authority you could feel. "Lieutenant Carver, you have 30 seconds. Tell me why you're calling this number." Carver's mouth felt like it was full of cotton, but he pushed the words out. "Sir, a soldier in my unit gave me this contact for a background check. She's facing accusations that don't match her performance record. I need to know if what's in her file is the complete picture or if there's more to her story that I'm not cleared to see. Her name is Corporal Kate Brennan." The pause that followed was shorter this time. "Her record is 100% accurate as written. That's all you need to know, Lieutenant. Respectfully, sir, that's not good enough. I've got sergeants filing reports that are tearing my unit apart, and there's the matter of a tattoo that needs verification. The ink is authorized. Everything else is need to know, and you don't. What you need to do, Lieutenant, is make sure Corporal Brennan is protected from any more harassment so she can complete her assignment. Are we clear?" "Her assignment? Sir, am I stuttering?" Lieutenant Carver swallowed hard. "No, sir." "Good. Any further questions will go through official channels. This number is no longer active. Do not call it again." The line went dead. Carver sat in the darkness of his car, phone still pressed to his ear as the pieces slammed together in his mind. Protected. Assignment. Authorized. Brennan wasn't just a soldier caught in a mess. She was an operator. And Sergeant Hollis, whether he knew it or not, had just painted a massive target on his own back. Carver started the engine and drove straight to the company office. He had a few official reports of his own to file, the kind that would shine a very bright, very uncomfortable light on Sergeant Hollis. Tomorrow was going to be a day to remember. Miles away, back in her barracks room, Brennan was sound asleep, her hands resting peacefully on her stomach. Tucked beneath her long sleeves, the eagle tattoo on her forearm seemed to stand watch in the dark, its talons gripping the coordinates that would lead to justice. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. A quiet fell over the base, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. In the gap between what was known and what was suspected, a storm was brewing. This was just the beginning, but it came with a guarantee. Answers were coming, and once those answers arrived, nothing would be the same. The morning air was so charged with tension, you could practically see it. At 0700, the training yard was already a sea of hushed whispers and nervous glances. The gossip mill had been working overtime. Brennan was suspended. Hollis was pressing charges. Carver was making mysterious calls. Deep within the Army's bureaucratic engine, gears were grinding that no one could see, but everyone could feel. Brennan shouldn't have even been there. She was officially on desk duty pending the investigation. But when Jackson arrived at 0715 and saw her sitting on the exact same bench from the day before, gear packed and face calm, he understood. She wasn't just showing up, she was sent. Hollis spotted her immediately. The swagger from the night before had vanished, replaced by a twitchy anxiety around his eyes. He huddled with Draven near the equipment shed, both of them whispering furiously and constantly checking their phones as if waiting for a rescue call. Jackson found a good vantage point to watch the show, his notepad at the ready. Every last one of his instincts told him the fuse had been lit. At 0730, Lieutenant Carver emerged from the company building, flanked by 2 military police officers. A dead silence fell over the entire yard. Soldiers who had been stretching and joking just a moment ago were now frozen statues. MPs on the training grounds meant one thing: career-ending trouble. Carver's voice sliced through the quiet. "On your feet! Formation! Now!" 35 soldiers scrambled into lines, the sound of their boots on the dirt a nervous drumbeat. Brennan rose from her bench to join them, but Carver held up a hand. "Corporal Brennan, stay where you are." She paused, then returned to the bench and sat, her hands resting calmly on her knees. From across the yard, Jackson could see the steady rhythm of her breathing, the 4-count combat breath. She was the eye of the hurricane. Hollis stood ramrod straight in the formation, his jaw clenched, his eyes bouncing between Carver and the MPs. Beside him, Draven looked like he'd seen a ghost, his hand clenching his phone in his pocket like a lifeline. The two soldiers who had sided with Hollis were now doing everything they could to look invisible. Carver marched to the center of the formation, his hands locked behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was level, but it had an edge like a razor. Yesterday, an official complaint was filed regarding Corporal Brennan's conduct during a training exercise. That complaint has been thoroughly investigated. What I'm about to do is unconventional, but under the circumstances and by direct order from the chain of command, it's necessary. He let that hang in the air for a moment. Master Sergeant Jackson, front and center. Jackson stepped forward, his stride as steady and certain as a man who had seen it all twice. He snapped to attention next to Carver and waited. Master Sergeant, you supervised yesterday's wall climb. Your verbal report contradicted Sergeant Hollis's written one. I need you to state your official account again, right now, for everyone to hear. Jackson's voice rolled across the yard like thunder. Sir, I maintained visual contact with Corporal Brennan throughout the entire wall climb. She wore regulation gloves at all times. The equipment failed, the user did not. Her recovery was textbook. She violated 0 safety protocols. A wave of murmurs rippled through the formation. Hollis's face darkened, but he was smart enough to keep his mouth shut. Carver gave a sharp, decisive nod, noted, Thank you, Master Sergeant. He then turned his gaze to Brennan. Corporal Brennan, on your feet. She stood, swung her pack over her shoulder, and strode to the front, every eye in the yard tracking her. She stopped before Carver and stood at attention, her expression unreadable. Carver studied her for a long moment, and in that silence, Jackson saw a look pass between them, an unspoken agreement, a plan clicking into place. Corporal, I am giving you a direct order. You will follow it to the letter. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Roll up your sleeves. Both of them. All the way to the shoulder. You could have heard a pin drop on the dirt. Brennan reached for her right sleeve first. She unbuttoned the cuff and slowly pushed the fabric up past her wrist, over her forearm and bicep, until it was gathered at her shoulder. Nothing but tanned skin, powerful muscle, and a few pale scars from old training drills. Then she moved to her left arm. She rolled this sleeve even slower, drawing out the moment, because everyone knew this was the one. The tattoo emerged from beneath the cloth, inch by inch. First, the talons, the black ink stark against her skin. Then the body of an eagle, its wings spreading as the sleeve rose higher. And finally, it was completely exposed in the morning sun. An eagle, its gaze fierce and forward. And beneath it, a designation, TF-17, 2K-19. And below that, 2 words. Op Sandstorm. Jackson heard a dozen soldiers gasp audibly. He saw others leaning forward, squinting to read the code. Hollis staggered back as if he'd been physically struck, bumping into the man behind him. Draven's phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the ground. Carver stepped closer, examining the tattoo with a clinical eye. Master Sergeant Jackson, you served 6 years with Joint Special Operations Command. Do you recognize that insignia? Jackson's throat felt tight, but his voice was like granite. Yes, sir. That is the mark of Task Force 17. That eagle is specific to their maritime counterterrorism operators. And that operation code, it refers to a classified mission in 2019. I'd seen that symbol once before in a top-secret briefing I definitely wasn't supposed to be in. Now, can just anyone walk into a parlor and get this tattoo? Absolutely not. That design is a federally protected mark. Getting it inked without earning it is a serious crime, but to have it and be able to prove it's yours? He paused, searching for the words. It means she has operated in places that don't exist on any map. And she's carried out missions that will never see the inside of a report. A quiet, stunned gasp spread through the ranks. This wasn't some tall tale. This wasn't a new recruit trying to look tough with a fake story. This was the real deal. And in that moment, for every single person who had laughed, pointed, and passed around her photo, the solid ground beneath their boots turned to thin air. But Carver wasn't finished. He turned to Brennan. Corporal, your official file lists you as administrative support. You handle logistics, paperwork. There's not a single mention of you ever setting foot in a combat zone. How do you explain this? He gestured to the tattoo. Brennan's voice was quiet, but it sliced through the silence of the yard. My service record is 100% accurate, sir. But the things that aren't in my record are also 100% true. What in the world is that supposed to mean? It means some missions are never recorded. Carver nodded slowly, as if this was the exact answer he'd been waiting for. Do you have any physical proof on you, besides the tattoo? Any special ID or documentation? Without a word, Brennan reached under the collar of her uniform and pulled out her dog tags. Just two simple metal rectangles on a chain. At first glance, they looked completely standard. She lifted the chain over her head and handed them to Carver. He held them up, catching the morning light as he read the stamped text aloud. Brennan, Kate, serial number B4471, TF17. He stopped dead, his eyes widening. Master Sergeant, is this serial number format standard issue? Jackson stepped closer, took a single look, and felt his own heart pound against his ribs. No, sir. A standard Army serial never, ever includes a unit code like that. That format is exclusively for personnel whose service records are completely classified. It's an offline verification method to prove she is who that tattoo says she is. Carver handed the tags back to Brennan, who slipped them back on and tucked them neatly out of sight. He then took a ruggedized tablet from a nearby military policeman, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it so everyone in the formation could see. This is a classified personnel file system. I was granted one-time access this morning by an officer whose name I'm not authorized to say. He typed in Brennan's serial number. The screen flashed and a file appeared. Most of it was censored with huge black boxes covering dates and locations. But some information was left visible. There was a picture of a much younger Brennan in full tactical gear, a massive list of medals and commendations all classified, and at the very bottom, a single line. Status, active, special assignment phase 2. This time, the gasps were audible and shaky. From the back of the formation, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Carver powered down the tablet and returned it. When he turned back to the soldiers, his entire demeanor had shifted. This was no longer a lieutenant talking down to his troops. This was a junior officer standing before someone who walked in circles he could only ever read about. Corporal Brennan. His voice was now crisp, formal, and filled with respect. On behalf of every soldier standing here, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you have endured. All accusations against you are dismissed. Your conduct has been nothing but professional. Then, in a stunning move that made even Jackson's jaw drop, Carver snapped to attention and threw a sharp, perfect salute. A wave of motion ripped through the formation as 35 soldiers scrambled to follow suit, their hands flying up in a chaotic but unified salute. The gesture was like a contagion, spreading even to the smirking bullies who had been with Hollis. They saluted because they had to, because the hard reality of rank and proof had just crashed into their petty prejudices and utterly destroyed them. Brennan returned the salute with a single, precise motion before dropping her hand. Her face remained neutral, but Jackson saw the smallest bit of tension release from her eyes. Being proven right always feels good, even when you knew you were right all along. Carver lowered his salute and fixed his gaze on Hollis. Sergeant Hollis, step forward. Hollis was frozen solid. His boots might as well have been welded to the asphalt as his face cycled through shock, then rage, and then landed on pure, unfiltered panic. Draven had to physically shove him forward. Sergeant Hollis, you filed a fabricated safety violation. You organized the harassment of a fellow soldier, and based on our initial findings, you may be involved in activities far more serious than workplace bullying. Carver gave a slight nod to the MPs. You are confined to quarters pending a formal investigation. Surrender your phone, your ID, and any personal electronic devices now. Sir, Hollis's voice cracked. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just upholding standards. By falsifying official documents, by leading a targeted harassment campaign, by issuing off-the-record threats in the training yard at 9 p.m. last night. Hollis's mouth slammed shut. His panicked eyes darted to Brennan, who simply met his gaze with that same unwavering, patient calm. He had been so convinced she was an easy mark, a loner with no one to back her up. He never imagined that every word he spoke, every threat he made, had been observed, recorded, and sent straight up a chain of command he didn't even know existed. One of the MPs stepped forward. "Sergeant, we can do this easy, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Hollis's entire body seemed to deflate. He pulled out his phone and wallet, handing everything over in defeat. As the MP bagged the items as evidence, Hollis made one last, desperate attempt to save himself. "She's setting us up. This is a trap. She was sent here to frame us." Carver's face was made of granite. "Keep talking, Sergeant. You're only making the investigators' job easier for them." As they led him away, Draven was still standing in the formation, shaking as he watched his ringleader get marched toward the MP station. The other soldiers stared at the ground, at the sky, anywhere but at each other, the shame of their own actions settling on them like a thick coat of grime. Carver's voice rang out again. "Corporal Draven, front and center." Draven obeyed, his steps unsteady. Standing before the lieutenant, he looked like a man watching his entire future go up in smoke. "Corporal, you have a critical choice to make right now. You participated in the harassment. You illegally distributed images of a fellow soldier. You were present for an unsanctioned confrontation that violated numerous regulations. But you are not the one who started it." Carver's tone softened slightly. "So, I will ask you one time, and your future in this army depends on your answer. Are you involved in anything deeper than harassment? Anything related to base equipment, inventory records, or unauthorized transfers?" Draven looked like a fish out of water, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Beads of sweat were popping out on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He shot a desperate look at Brennan, who offered him absolutely nothing in return. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a breath, he choked out, "I think I need a lawyer." Carver let out a long, weary sigh. "Take him away." The second MP moved in. Draven offered no resistance as they collected his devices and escorted him away in the same direction as Hollis, 2 down. The formation stood in stunned silence, a thick cloud of fear hanging over them. Jackson moved up to Carver's side. "Sir, what is really going on here?" Carver's eyes scanned the remaining soldiers. "It's worse than we thought. CID has been tracking stolen high-end equipment for 6 months. Night vision gear, advanced body armor, weapon optics, small thefts, but it added up fast. The trail went cold right here in this unit. They knew someone on the inside was responsible, but they couldn't identify them. So they sent in a specialist." He glanced toward Brennan, someone who could blend in, observe the social dynamics, and bait the guilty parties by presenting herself as a vulnerable target. And Hollis bit. Oh, Hollis didn't just bite. He swallowed the hook, line, and sinker. Jackson looked over at Brennan, who was now sitting on a bench, calmly rolling down her sleeves to cover the tattoo that had just detonated the entire social order of the base. How much of this did she orchestrate? Every last bit of it. Master Sergeant, every insult she endured, every ridiculous test they put her through, every moment of humiliation was a calculated move to make Hollis and his crew overconfident and sloppy. And it worked perfectly. We have their complete chat logs, financial statements, and hidden camera footage. The second he tried to privately threaten her last night, he gave us the probable cause we needed for search warrants. Carver glanced at his watch. Warrants that are being served all over this base as we speak. As if on cue, Jackson's phone vibrated in his pocket. He yanked his phone out, scanned the text, and his eyebrows nearly flew off his forehead. CID had just raided the logistics warehouse. They'd discovered 12 night vision units tucked away in a shipping container that didn't exist on any official records. Carver's jaw tightened. 12 units. That was over $100,000 in high-tech gear. This wasn't some guy stealing supplies. This was a professional smuggling ring. The formation was broken up, but the order was clear. Nobody leaves the base. Everyone was a potential suspect. Soldiers scattered in hushed, anxious clusters, whipping out their phones the moment they thought no one was looking. The very same group chat that was roasting Corporal Brennan yesterday was now likely exploding with pure panic. Master Sergeant Jackson spotted Brennan calmly zipping her gear bag, each movement precise and unhurried. Corporal. She glanced up. Master Sergeant. Watching her was both incredibly impressive and deeply unsettling. A faint smile touched the corners of her mouth. Thank you. How long have you known about the smuggling operation? Since my second week on base, Hollis was funneling the stolen gear through a buddy of his, a civilian who owns one of those military surplus shops right outside the gates. Draven was the tech guy, scrubbing the equipment from the digital inventory logs. A couple of other guys in the platoon acted as lookouts and muscle. They were a small team, but they were slick, and you just let them pick on you for 4 weeks because when people feel powerful from harassing someone, they get comfortable. They think they're in charge, and comfortable people get sloppy. They make mistakes. She hoisted her bag onto her shoulder. I needed them to get loud and careless, and they did. Jackson just slowly shook his head, his face a perfect blend of admiration and total disbelief. You have ice in your veins, Corporal. Patience is a virtue, Master Sergeant. There's a world of difference. Before he could respond, a sharp voice sliced through the nervous chatter. Brennan, my office. Now, it was Lieutenant Carver. She shot Jackson a brief nod and headed for the company building, leaving him watching her go. He replayed the last month in his head, this quiet soldier, taking insults and veiled threats as if she were wrapped in Kevlar. She never got rattled, never snapped back. She just waited. Waited for the perfect moment to pull the pin and show them all who was really in charge. That's a kind of toughness they don't teach you in basic training. It's forged in fire. Inside the office, the lieutenant clicked the door shut and gestured to a chair. Brennan sat, her posture relaxed, but her eyes missing nothing. Carver settled in behind his desk, folding his hands together. I've got to ask, Corporal, completely off the record, why not just flash me your credentials on day one? Why let them put you through all that? Brennan took a moment, gathering her words. When she spoke, her voice was even and quiet, yet it seemed to carry an immense weight that filled the small office. Because predators only reveal their true nature when they believe their prey is helpless. I let them see me as weak. I weaponized their disrespect. Hollis wasn't just a loudmouth bully, sir. He was the linchpin of a smuggling operation that's been bleeding this base dry for months. If I had come in here announcing I was an investigator, he would have shut down, buried the evidence, and maybe even vanished. I needed him to be arrogant. I needed him to be sloppy. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked on Carver's. 6 weeks of their so-called jokes and pranks gave me names, phone records, and confessions they had no idea they were making. That tattoo wasn't just bait, it was the hook, line, and sinker. Hollis couldn't resist. He had to mock what he assumed was a lie, a classic case of stolen valor. But every time he opened his mouth, every picture Draven posted online to make fun of me, every bogus complaint he filed against me, it was all another brick in the wall of evidence. It created a documented timeline of harassment. It proved his character, and it established a pattern of behavior that gave the Criminal Investigations Division all the probable cause they could ever need. Carver listened, completely spellbound. I didn't lose my dignity, Lieutenant. I turned it into a weapon. Every time Hollis tried to shove me down, I made a note. Every time Draven shared a mocking photo, it went straight into my evidence file. Every threat, every confrontation, it all helped me build a case that is now airtight. And as of this morning, 40 stolen night vision units have been recovered. 9 smugglers are currently in custody. Their entire supply chain has been dismantled, and this unit is finally clean. She leaned back, her hands resting calmly in her lap. You asked me why I didn't speak up. Because real justice isn't about shouting, sir. It's patient. It's about letting the guilty trip over their own egos and then moving with absolute precision. Her voice softened, but lost none of its intensity. True strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about having the discipline to do the right thing when nobody is watching, to give you a pat on the back. I stayed silent so the right people would get comfortable and start talking. And man, did they ever talk. The office was quiet for a beat, the only sound the gentle hum of the air conditioner. Carver let the implications wash over him, the full strategy snapping into focus. This wasn't just an investigation. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Brennan had painted a bullseye on her own back, absorbed every bit of their abuse, and used it as ammunition against them. And she had played her role flawlessly, without a single misstep. Carver searched for the words. That's more than I could have possibly imagined. You asked for the truth, sir. And you gave it, he acknowledged. He pulled open a desk drawer and slid a folder across the polished wood. This just arrived from CID. They need you for a full debrief at 1400 hours. They want a complete report, everything you observed, a detailed timeline, and your recommendations to make sure this loophole is closed for good. Brennan picked up the file, her eyes scanning the cover. Understood. There's one more thing. Carver's expression grew more serious. Your handler passed along a message. As soon as this debrief is over and you've provided your testimony at the court-martial, you're getting a new assignment. A new target, back in the States this time. A flicker of intense focus sparked in her eyes. Phase 2? That phrase clearly means something to you. It means the job's not over. This story is a powerful lesson that patience is a true superpower. If you believe in the power of quiet strength and real justice, share this so more people can be inspired. And stick around, because her fight is far from over. Carver rose from his chair, rounded the desk, and extended his hand. Brennan stood and took it. The handshake was firm, professional. For what it's worth, Corporal, you have my absolute respect. What you did here took a level of courage and intelligence that is truly rare. I am genuinely sorry you had to endure that to see this mission through. It was a necessary part of the plan, sir. And it worked. She released his hand, took the file, and headed for the door. Just as her fingers brushed the doorknob, Carver called her name one last time. Brennan. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. That thing you said about justice being patient, I think I'm going to use that. For the very first time, a genuine smile spread across her face. It's all yours, Lieutenant. The door clicked shut, leaving Carver alone in his office. He sank back into his chair, staring at the empty seat, his mind replaying every word she'd said. All across the installation, the gears of military justice were grinding into motion. Hollis was about to face a court-martial for theft of government property, fraud, and conspiracy. Draven would almost certainly make a deal to get a reduced sentence. The rest of their little crew would be rounded up within hours. And Brennan, she would move on to the next assignment, the next target, the next group of criminals who would make the fatal mistake of underestimating the quiet girl in the room. The consequences were already beginning. The fallout was immediate and decisive. Within the hour, Hollis and Draven were formally charged and confined to the base stockade to await their trial. Their phones and laptops were seized, and it took the digital forensics team less than an hour to break the encryption and find texts, transaction records, and incriminating messages with the owner of the off-base surplus store. By noon, that civilian was in federal custody, and his shop was being meticulously dismantled by federal agents. Then the personal fallout began. Hollis was immediately stripped of his rank, his security clearance was revoked, and his military career was effectively over. His family was notified, his name would forever be tied to this disgrace. Draven, seeing the writing on the wall, chose to cooperate fully and spent the rest of the afternoon in an interrogation room, spilling every detail he knew in a desperate attempt to save himself. The other two soldiers who had acted as Hollis's enforcers were easily identified from security camera footage. When brought in for questioning, they claimed total ignorance of any smuggling, insisting they were just following Hollis's lead in harassing Brennan. Whether that was the whole truth or not would be determined later, but their careers were already permanently tarnished by their association with him. The professional consequences landed on the entire unit like a ton of bricks. By 1500 hours, the battalion commander had initiated a command-wide, top-to-bottom audit of all sensitive military equipment. All training exercises were suspended for 48 hours, while investigators conducted interviews with every single person in the company. A slew of new policies was announced: mandatory annual ethics training, stricter inventory control measures, and a new anonymous tip line for reporting misconduct. The message from the highest levels of command was crystal clear. The unit had a rot that ran deep, and the time for cutting it out had finally come. The fallout hit the base like a tidal wave. Every soldier who'd ever snickered at Brennan, passed around the photo of her tattoo, or cracked a joke at her expense was called into a very tense meeting with their commanding officers. They talked about respect, unit cohesion, and professional conduct. While most weren't formally charged, their names went onto a watch list. In an instant, their judgment was officially questionable. And in the military, where your word is your bond, that's a stain that never truly fades. The group chat Draven used to post the pictures, it was now Exhibit A. Everyone in that chat got mandatory counseling, and more than a few were shipped off to other units just to shatter the toxic culture for good. By 1700 hours, as the evening air began to settle, only two figures remained in the empty training yard: Master Sergeant Jackson and Corporal Brennan. After giving their official statements, they were free to go. He found her on the exact same bench where her public humiliation had started, her eyes fixed on the obstacle wall where she had supposedly failed. Thinking of taking another crack at that wall? He asked gently, taking a seat beside her. No, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm thinking about how many times I came this close to quitting. Week 3 was the absolute worst. Hollis had just about everyone convinced I was dead weight. I had 0 friends, nobody to talk to except my handler on an encrypted line. Every single morning, I had to force myself out of bed and put on the mask of the weakling. But you didn't quit, he stated, more than asked. No, because quitting meant they'd win, she replied. Worse than that, it meant the smuggling ring would keep operating. More of our equipment would disappear, our enemies would get their hands on it, and maybe our own soldiers would die because their night vision goggles were sold to the highest bidder. She finally turned, her eyes meeting his. I couldn't carry that weight. Jackson gave a slow, deliberate nod. When I first saw that tattoo, he said, I figured you were running from something. I was hiding, Master Sergeant, she corrected him. Not from my past, though. I was hiding in plain sight, waiting for the wolves to show their teeth. And now, it's time to move on. There's always another mission, another target, another crew of loudmouths who think the quiet girl in the corner is an easy mark. A sharp, confident smile played on her lips. And I plan to spend my entire career proving them all wrong. An easy silence fell between them as the sun dipped below the horizon. Across the base, in the CID building, investigators were compiling a mountain of evidence that would put several soldiers behind bars. In a cell at the brig, Hollis was staring at a concrete wall, replaying every mistake. In the battalion commander's office, new regulations were being drafted, policies that would carry Brennan's invisible fingerprint for years to come. And hundreds of miles away, in a secure, nondescript building, Brennan's handler closed her final report and allowed himself a small smile. The undercover operation had been a flawless success. The agent had held her cover under extreme psychological stress. The entire smuggling network was in shambles. They had recovered 96% of the stolen gear, and the conviction rate was looking like a solid 100%. The handler closed the file, opened a new one, and began planning the next phase. For 6 weeks, she was the platoon's punching bag, the quiet one they all thought was a pushover. And they pushed hard. What they never suspected was that the meek little corporal they loved to bully was actually a wolf in sheep's clothing, and they were her prey. Ever wonder what happens when the weakest person in the room is secretly the one holding all the cards? Stick around and find out. At 1800 hours, Corporal Brennan entered her barracks and found an envelope lying on her cot. Inside were her new orders, taking effect in 72 hours. The destination was redacted, the mission briefing was missing, but a handwritten note at the bottom said everything. Outstanding work, Corporal. The next hunt is a whole different league. You in? She tucked the note away, flipped open her small green notebook to a fresh page, and wrote 2 words at the top. Phase 2. Below that, she began to take notes. Every insult had been a lesson, teaching her the precise emotional triggers for men like them. Every moment of harassment had been a masterclass in the mindset of a predator, and the entire 6-week ordeal was proof that patience, when wielded correctly, was the sharpest blade in her arsenal. Outside, the base was settling down for the night. The familiar sounds echoed in the cool air, soldiers lining up for chow, the hum of lights in the barracks, the distant bark of a drill sergeant. It all seemed perfectly normal. But just beneath that surface, justice was moving silently, efficiently, and getting the job done. Brennan snapped her notebook closed, leaned back on her bunk, and began the steady breathing exercises that had been her anchor through 6 weeks of calculated hell. It was a simple 4-count rhythm, the same one that would carry her into whatever came next. Right then, her phone vibrated. A text from Master Sergeant Jackson. "Heard you're heading out. One for the road?" She typed back a quick reply. "Can't. Got an early start. But thanks for having my 6, Master Sergeant." His response was immediate. "Anytime, Corporal. And for what it's worth, that tattoo isn't just decoration. It's a promise. Glad to see you're keeping it." A faint smile crossed her face as she read his words. Then she deleted the entire conversation. No trail, no loose ends. The mission was all that mattered. At 2100 hours, she completed her final task of the day. Logging into a secure portal, she fired off a quick message to her handler. "Mission complete. All targets neutralized. Awaiting orders for Phase 2. She added one more line. Recommend employing the same undercover strategy at other high-risk installations. Asset is willing and ready to proceed. The reply came in under 2 minutes. Roger that. New briefing attached. Memorize and delete. You go live Monday at 0600. This network is bigger and smarter. You'll need every trick in the book. You still in?" Brennan's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Affirmative. I'm ready." The response was instant. "Good. Because this time, you're hunting a guy who knows how we operate. Stay sharp, Corporal. And remember, justice isn't loud." She finished the sentence for him, her fingers typing out the creed that had become her own. "I know. It's patient." She downloaded the encrypted file, read it through twice until the details were seared into her brain, then permanently erased it. The new target was a logistics officer selling advanced military tech to foreign governments. It was a more sophisticated, more paranoid, and far more lethal operation, which meant Brennan would have to become even more invisible, even more forgettable. The kind of person they'd never see coming until the jaws of the trap snapped shut. She packed her duffel bag with a practiced, methodical calm. Uniforms, boots, her green notebook, and the set of dog tags that told the world who she truly was beneath any disguise. The very last thing she packed, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, was a heavy, worn, challenge coin. The coin's edges were smooth from years of handling, stamped with a fierce eagle on one side and a set of classified coordinates on the other. It was a gift from a Special Forces A-team she had saved during a mission codenamed Operation Sandstorm. A team that officially didn't exist on a mission that never happened. But their gratitude was real, delivered in the form of a coin she would never part with and a tattoo she would never cover up. She held it for a moment, the familiar weight a solid reminder of who she was and what she did, before tucking it safely away. Tomorrow, she would be gone. She'd be leaving behind Master Sergeant Jackson, the crooked soldiers who saw her as a nobody, and the smugglers who learned the hard way that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. But the work would continue, because somewhere out there, another traitor was selling out their country, betraying their comrades, and putting lives at risk and Corporal Kate Brennan, patient, precise, and relentless, would be there to balance the scales. The main lights in the barracks flickered and went out. Down the hall, she could hear the easy laughter of other soldiers, oblivious, living their normal lives, never knowing that a ghost was living among them. Brennan closed her eyes, letting the steady 4-count breath take over. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. Tomorrow was a new board, a new set of pieces, and a much more dangerous game. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, justice had the upper hand, and that was enough. The camera of this story pulls away from her, out of the barracks, soaring over the sprawling, sleeping base and up into the vast, dark sky, dotted with cold, distant stars. And somewhere in that darkness, a secure signal pulsed once. Phase 2 was officially a go. And all the people who thought they were clever, who were sure their secrets were safe, who smugly believed no one was watching, they were all about to learn a very painful lesson. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. And it was already inside the wire.